Have you ever witnessed something so simple yet so profoundly moving that it silently stirred something deep within you? Sometimes the most life-changing moments are not dramatic or loud. They are quiet, subtle, and transformative, awakening parts of the heart we didn't know existed. Watching someone live their faith with sincerity can plant a seed in our own hearts, a seed that grows into a journey of understanding, reflection, and transformation. There is a subtle yet undeniable power in witnessing someone's devotion, in seeing the sincerity with which they connect to God, and in feeling the peace that emanates from that connection. When I watched my friend pray, I noticed something that words cannot fully capture: the calm presence in her heart, the humility in her movements, and the quiet yet profound submission to something greater than herself. It was not simply the physical act of prayer that drew me in, but the inner light, the serenity, and the authenticity that radiated from her being. Observing her devotion made me pause and reflect on my own life, on the restlessness I had long felt, and on the yearning for meaning and purpose that had remained unanswered despite all my efforts to find fulfillment in the external world. It was a gentle awakening that whispered to my soul, there is more to life than what you are seeking in distractions and temporary pleasures. There is a higher purpose, and it is calling you. A curiosity soon turned into introspection. I began asking myself questions I'd never allowed to surface. What is the purpose of my life? What is missing in my heart? Could there be a path that provides not only guidance, but also peace, clarity, and resilience? The presence of my friend's faith became a mirror, reflecting not only what was possible in life, but also what I had been missing in my own spiritual journey. This reflection was not without struggle. Acknowledging my own spiritual void required confronting long-held assumptions, doubts, and even fears about embracing a new faith. But it was precisely in this confrontation that the first seeds of transformation were planted, showing me that spiritual awakening often begins with a question, a spark of curiosity, and the courage to look inward honestly. Learning about Islam became my next step. Discovered that faith is not simply about rituals or rules, but about cultivating a connection between the heart, mind, and soul, creating a structure that brings purpose, clarity, and peace to daily life. Prayer was no longer just an action to be observed. It became a sanctuary, a space to engage in dialogue with the divine, to reflect, to seek guidance, and to cultivate patience, gratitude, and mindfulness. I began to understand that even small acts performed sincerely and consistently carry immense power in shaping the heart and aligning it with a higher purpose. Observing my friend's consistent practice illustrated that devotion is less about perfection and more about intention, sincerity, and persistence, teaching me that spiritual growth is a gradual process, one that unfolds over time and through deliberate engagement with faith. The journey also highlighted the importance of supportive examples. Witnessing my friend's faith and having someone to guide me without judgment provided reassurance and clarity. Transitioning into a new faith is rarely simple. It often comes with doubts, fears, and societal pressures. Supportive companions, however, offer encouragement, patience, and practical wisdom, reminding us that the path to spiritual growth is not meant to be walked alone. Their presence allows us to move from curiosity to reflection, from reflection to deliberate practice, and from practice to genuine integration of faith into daily life, showing that spiritual transformation is both deeply personal and relational. Integration into daily life brought the most profound shifts. Prayer, reflection, and conscious engagement with faith began to influence not only my spiritual awareness, but also my emotional resilience, relationships, and decision-making. Faith provided a framework for understanding experiences, navigating challenges, and cultivating patience and gratitude. I realized that transformation is holistic. It changes how one thinks, feels, interacts with others, and perceives the world. Through consistent engagement, I felt the restlessness in my heart replaced by purpose, confusion replaced by clarity, and yearning replaced by trust and connection. I learned that conversion is not a single act, but a lifelong journey of reflection, practice, and alignment with principles that nurture the heart and soul. Ultimately, my journey showed me that the power of witnessing sincere faith can spark profound internal change. It is often a quiet observation, a subtle moment, or an act of devotion in someone else's life that awakens curiosity and reflection in our own hearts. Transformation begins with that spark and grows through deliberate effort, reflection, and the integration of spiritual principles into daily life. This journey is neither immediate nor without challenges, but with sincerity, guidance, and patience, it cultivates resilience, clarity, and profound inner peace. demonstrating that faith is not a distant ideal, but an accessible, transformative reality for any heart willing to notice, reflect, and embrace it. The moment I first observed my friend engaged in prayer, I was struck by a depth of presence, sincerity, and serenity that went far beyond the mere physical actions she was performing, because it became immediately evident that what I was witnessing was not a routine, mechanical ritual, but a profound interaction between the human heart and the divine, a living expression of devotion that seemed to radiate peace, humility, and alignment from within. And in that quiet moment, I felt a stirring in my own soul, a gentle recognition of the emptiness and restlessness I had long carried, but had rarely examined with honesty or attention. And it was as though a door had been opened to a part of myself that had been quietly yearning for connection, guidance, and purpose. A part of my heart that I had tried to fill with transient distractions, fleeting pleasures, and external validation, but which could not be truly satisfied without a deeper, more enduring spiritual anchor. And as I continued to watch, I realized that the power of faith is not in its outward appearance or complexity, but in the authenticity and consistency with which it is lived. Because the inner alignment between intention and action creates a presence that speaks directly to the heart, awakening reflection, curiosity, and longing in ways that no argument or explanation could. And in observing this, I began to ask myself difficult questions about my own life, my priorities, and the ways in which I had been navigating the world, recognizing that much of what I had pursued had offered temporary satisfaction at best, leaving a persistent sense of incompleteness at its core. And this recognition was both unsettling and liberating, because it revealed the inherent human desire for purpose, for meaning, and for connection with something greater than ourselves, a desire that cannot be fulfilled through material accumulation, social approval, or self-centered pursuits. And it became clear that my own heart had been quietly seeking guidance, structure, and alignment all along, and that witnessing another's devotion had provided a mirror in which I could see the possibility of that fulfillment, demonstrating that spiritual awakening often begins not with dramatic events or extreme circumstances, but with subtle, consistent acts of sincerity and the courage to notice them, because these moments spark reflection, inspire questioning, and ignite the desire to engage in one's own journey toward understanding. And as I reflected, I became increasingly aware of the transformative potential of faith to shape not only inner life, but also outward actions, emotional resilience, and moral clarity. Because when the heart aligns with intention, thought, and practice, it begins to experience a sense of coherence, stability, peace that extends into every aspect of existence, influencing relationships, decision-making, and the ability to navigate challenges with patience and trust. And this awareness prompted me to consider the steps I could take to cultivate such alignment in my own life, recognizing that true spiritual growth is a gradual, intentional process that requires reflection, learning, and practice, and that the observation of another's devotion serves as both a catalyst and a guide, illuminating the possibilities inherent in sincere engagement with faith. And in this understanding, I realized that my journey would be both personal and relational, shaped by internal reflection, as well as the guidance and example of those who embody the principles I aspire to cultivate. And it became clear that even small, deliberate steps toward prayer, reflection, and consistent practice could accumulate into profound transformation, reshaping the heart, mind, and soul, guiding them toward clarity, resilience, and enduring connection with the divine. And that the first spark, simply noticing someone living their faith sincerely, was often the most powerful catalyst for change, capable of awakening a lifelong journey of exploration, understanding, and alignment, because it demonstrates that spiritual inspiration is accessible to every heart willing to pause, reflect, and take the initial steps toward conscious engagement with faith, ultimately revealing that transformation is not instantaneous, but arises from sustained effort, intentionality, and the courage to confront the voids within oneself while embracing the guidance, structure, and purpose offered by a higher, divinely aligned path. As the initial spark of inspiration from observing my friend's prayer settled in my heart, I found myself drawn into a deeper and more intentional process of reflection, because I realized that witnessing faith in someone else does not automatically translate into one's own understanding or practice. instead creates an opportunity to ask meaningful questions, to examine one's own life, and to confront the inner restlessness and uncertainty that often accompany a lack of spiritual grounding. And in this period of reflection, I began to recognize the countless ways I had been seeking fulfillment in temporary distractions, fleeting pleasures, and external validations, all of which had provided moments of satisfaction but never lasting peace. And I noticed that my soul had been yearning for a sense of purpose, structure, and connection that transcended the material and temporal dimensions of life. And this recognition brought both discomfort and hope because it forced me to confront the inadequacies of the paths I had previously relied upon, while also revealing the possibility of a more meaningful, coherent, and spiritually aligned existence. And in contemplating these truths, I realized that faith is not merely a set of rituals or obligations, but a living framework that cultivates alignment between the heart, mind, and soul, creating resilience, clarity, perspective in the face of life's inevitable uncertainties and challenges. And I understood that this alignment is cultivated gradually through reflection, learning, consistent practice, because it requires the heart to internalize principles that guide behavior, shape perception, and foster a sustained sense of purpose, meaning, and connection. And as I explored the teachings and practices of Islam, I discovered that prayer, reflection, and sincere engagement are not separate activities, but deeply interconnected pathways through which the heart experiences guidance, tranquility, and trust. And I realized that the physical act of prayer is, in fact, a vehicle for cultivating mindfulness, patience, gratitude, and humility, and for fostering a profound dialogue with the divine that nurtures the soul while providing practical structure for navigating daily life. And it was through this understanding that I began to appreciate the subtle yet transformative power of consistent practice, because each deliberate action, no matter how small, reinforces alignment between intention and behavior, gradually shaping thought patterns, emotional responses, and character. And I began to notice that as I engaged with these practices, my mind grew clearer, my emotions became more regulated, and my perspective on life shifted toward patience, gratitude, and trust. And I recognized that spiritual awakening is neither instantaneous nor dependent on dramatic events, but emerges through cumulative, deliberate engagement with practices that cultivate presence, reflection, and alignment. And in this realization, I also acknowledge the role of external examples, like my friend whose sincerity and humility in prayer provided a living illustration of what it means to integrate faith authentically into life, because observing such devotion inspires reflection, models consistency, and demonstrates the tangible benefits of faith in shaping one's demeanor, choices, and interactions with others. And yet I understood that inspiration alone is insufficient. It must be coupled with intentional effort, personal reflection, and the gradual internalization of principles that guide not only outward action, but also the inner orientation of the heart. And this dual process of external observation and internal cultivation became central to my understanding of spiritual growth, highlighting that conversion and awakening are not singular moments, but ongoing journeys that unfold over time through deliberate practice, sincerity, and the willingness to confront doubts, fears, and long-standing habits, because faith is not merely a label or identity, but a dynamic, transformative engagement that shapes thought, character, and the way one experiences the world. And through this process, I began to experience subtle yet profound shifts in my daily life, noticing an increased sense of purpose, inner calm, clarity in decision-making, and the emergence of patience and resilience that had previously eluded me. And I realized that these changes were not the result of external circumstance, but the direct consequence of aligning intention with practice, cultivating the heart, mind, and soul through reflection, prayer, and sincere engagement. And it became evident to me that the path toward faith is ultimately a journey of ongoing awakening, a process that begins with curiosity, observation, and reflection, requires sustained effort, sincerity, and intentional practice to transform inspiration into a deep, enduring, and holistic spiritual transformation that permeates every dimension of life. As I continued to reflect on the spark that had been ignited in my heart by witnessing my friend's prayer, I began to understand that the journey toward embracing faith is not a sudden event, but a gradual, deliberate unfolding that engages the heart, mind, and soul simultaneously. Because spiritual awakening requires time for reflection, questioning, and internalization, and it demands both courage and patience, as the process often involves confronting deeply held assumptions, personal fears, and previously unexamined habits that may have distanced the heart from connection with the divine. And I realized that this stage of my journey was not about immediate transformation or perfection, but about creating a space within myself where inquiry, sincerity, and openness could flourish, allowing me to explore the meaning of faith and the practical ways it could shape my life, my character, and my relationships. In this exploration, I recognized that observing my friend's consistent practice of prayer was more than a simple demonstration of ritual. It was an illustration of the profound alignment between intention and action, living example of how faith integrates thought, emotion, and behavior into a coherent whole. And then I began to see that such alignment is not a natural state, but a cultivated one, nurtured through repeated practice, reflection, and the conscious effort to surrender to principles higher than one's personal desires or fleeting impulses. Because true spiritual growth is not merely an intellectual exercise, but a holistic transformation that touches every aspect of existence, influencing decisions, relationships, responses to challenges, and overall perspective on life. And I became increasingly aware that the act of engaging with faith, whether through prayer, reflection, or learning, provides the heart with both structure and sanctuary, a rhythm that fosters consistency, patience, and resilience, and allows one to navigate the uncertainties, trials, and moral complexities of life with clarity and trust. And as I embraced these practices, I began to notice subtle yet profound changes in my inner life, including heightened awareness of my intentions, increased emotional regulation, and a growing capacity for gratitude, humility, and empathy. And these transformations revealed to me that the heart, when aligned with deliberate practice, naturally gravitates toward peace, balance, and a sense of purpose that external achievements or material pursuits alone could never provide. And in recognizing this, also understood that conversion and spiritual awakening are inherently relational as well as personal, because observing others' sincerity and consistency, receiving guidance from supportive individuals, and witnessing examples of faith in action create a framework in which reflection, understanding, and intentional engagement can take root, encouraging the heart to move from curiosity to deliberate action and ultimately toward authentic internalization of spiritual principles. And I realized that while inspiration from others is powerful, it must be complemented by sustained personal effort, sincere intention, and deliberate practice, because transformation arises from active participation in the process, from the willingness to examine one's own life honestly, to confront weaknesses, and to embrace consistent habits that nurture the mind, heart, and soul. And as I reflected on these truths, I began to internalize the understanding that spiritual growth is not linear, that moments of doubt, hesitation, struggle are not signs of failure, but natural aspects of the process, serving as opportunities for deeper reflection, reliance on guidance, and cultivation of resilience. And through this lens, I learned to view my own journey with patience, kindness, and clarity, recognizing that each deliberate step, no matter how small, contributes cumulatively to profound transformation, gradually shaping the character, thoughts, and emotional responses in alignment with faith. And it became increasingly clear that this journey is both deeply personal and interconnected with the examples, support, and guidance of others, creating a dynamic interplay between observation, reflection, and action. And I realized that the process of embracing faith is ultimately a lifelong endeavor, one in which the heart continuously grows, adapts, and aligns with divine principles, fostering enduring peace, clarity, and purpose. Because the work of cultivating the heart is never complete, but every intentional effort contributes to an evolving spiritual life that permeates thought, emotion, and action, transforming not only how one experiences the world, but how one interacts with it, navigates challenges, and relates to self and others. And it was within this holistic process of reflection, observation, and deliberate practice that I discovered the profound reality of faith, that it is simultaneously a personal awakening, a relational experience, and a transformative journey that unfolds gradually, requiring patience, consistency, and sincere engagement, yet yielding a life imbued with meaning, resilience, and a deep, enduring connection to the divine, showing me that even the simplest act of witnessing devotion can catalyze a profound inner journey that reshapes the heart, mind, and soul in ways that last a lifetime. As I progressed further along this journey of faith, I began to realize that the process of embracing Islam was not merely about acquiring knowledge or mimicking the actions I had observed, but about cultivating an authentic, internal alignment between my heart, mind, and soul, because true spiritual transformation is not achieved through superficial adherence or rote imitation, but through sincere engagement, reflection, and the deliberate integration of faith, into every dimension of life. And I noticed that this integration required me to confront my own fears, doubts, and preconceptions, those subtle internal resistances that often manifest as hesitation, procrastination, or self-criticism. And I came to understand that these obstacles were not signs of failure, but rather natural elements of the human experience, moments meant to deepen reflection, cultivate humility, and strengthen resolve, because spiritual growth thrives on honesty with oneself and the courage to navigate internal resistance while persisting in sincere effort. And I began to appreciate that conversion and the adoption of faith is a dynamic, ongoing process, one that unfolds gradually and requires patience, because the heart cannot be forced into alignment, nor can understanding be rushed, but both are nurtured through consistent reflection, deliberate practice, and the cultivation of intentional habits that anchor the soul in purpose, meaning, and connection with the divine. And as I incorporated prayer, reflection, and study into my daily life, I began to notice profound shifts in my awareness, emotional regulation, and overall perspective on life, recognizing that the outward acts of devotion were inseparable from the inner transformation they fostered, because each conscious effort, repeated consistently, gradually reshapes thought patterns, emotional responses, and moral orientation, creating a coherence between belief, intention, and action. And I observed that the structure provided by these practices, including the rhythm of daily prayers, the intentional moments of reflection, and the cultivation of gratitude and mindfulness, offered both discipline and freedom, because while they required commitment and consistency, they also nurtured a sense of inner peace, stability, and resilience, demonstrating that discipline in spiritual practice is not restrictive, but liberating, guiding the heart toward alignment, clarity, and profound connection with the divine. And in this stage, I became increasingly aware that witnessing my friend's devotion had served as the catalyst for my own awakening, but that genuine transformation required personal effort, reflection, and sustained engagement, because the heart must internalize the principles of faith, embody them in daily life, and allow them to shape character, decisions, and interactions with others. And I began to see that this process is simultaneously personal and relational, because observing the sincerity of others provides inspiration, guidance, and models for practice, while the personal engagement of the heart determines the depth, authenticity, and sustainability of transformation. And as I navigated this journey, I came to understand that challenges, doubts, and moments of uncertainty are not obstacles to spiritual growth, but essential elements of it, serving as opportunities for reflection, resilience, and deeper alignment with the principles of faith, because the heart grows not in the absence of difficulty, but through thoughtful engagement with life's trials, while remaining anchored in trust, patience, and conscious practice. And I noticed that through this ongoing interplay of reflection, observation, and deliberate practice, the heart begins to experience profound shifts, growing capacity for patience, empathy, humility, and gratitude, clarity in decision-making, emotional stability, and a sense of purpose that infuses even ordinary moments with meaning. And I realized that this holistic transformation extends beyond the spiritual dimension into psychological, emotional, and social aspects of life, because alignment with faith cultivates resilience, clarity, moral discernment, and an ability to navigate relationships with compassion, integrity, and awareness. And it became clear that the journey toward faith is not defined by perfection or immediate results, but by sincere intention, consistent effort, and the willingness to allow one's heart, mind, and soul to be gradually reshaped, because true spiritual growth is cumulative, built upon repeated engagement with practices that foster awareness, reflection, and alignment. And as I reflected on the entirety of my experience, I recognized that the initial spark of curiosity, ignited by observing my friend's prayer, had set into motion a profound, cascading process of internal awakening, reflection, practice, and transformation, demonstrating that even the simplest act of witnessing sincerity and devotion can catalyze a lifelong journey that cultivates clarity, resilience, purpose, and a deeply rooted connection with the divine, showing that faith, once embraced with sincerity and deliberate effort, has the power to reshape every aspect of life, guiding the heart, mind, and soul toward lasting alignment, peace, and fulfillment. And this realization reinforced the truth that the journey of spiritual transformation is both a privilege and a responsibility, requiring patience, reflection, and intentionality, while simultaneously offering the profound reward of a life lived with purpose, clarity, and enduring connection to God. And I understood that the ongoing work of cultivating the heart, mind, and soul is not a task to complete, but a journey to live moment by moment, choice by choice, reflection by reflection, and practice by practice, because this is the essence of true spiritual awakening, a continuous unfolding of awareness, alignment, and growth that shapes not only belief, but character, action, and the way one inhabits the world in a meaningful, purpose-driven, and divinely guided way. As I delved deeper into my journey of embracing Islam, I began to comprehend that true spiritual transformation is not only about understanding the teachings intellectually or performing rituals mechanically, about allowing the principles of faith to permeate every facet of life, reshaping the heart, mind, and soul in a coherent and purposeful manner, because authentic faith requires that the internal orientation of one's heart aligns with external actions, creating a harmony that informs decisions, relationships, and responses to life's challenges. And I noticed that this alignment cannot be rushed or forced, but is cultivated gradually through reflection, deliberate practice, and sincere intention. And it became increasingly clear that observing my friend's devotion had ignited the initial spark. The sustained growth and internalization of faith required a conscious commitment to learning self-reflection and consistent engagement with the spiritual practices that nurture awareness, patience, gratitude, and trust. And I realized that this process of integration is both deeply personal and relational, because while external examples inspire and provide guidance, the heart must choose to internalize, act, and persist in cultivating alignment between intention and behavior. And I began to see that the repeated acts of prayer, reflection, and study serve as anchors that provide both structure and sanctuary, guiding the heart through moments of doubt, restlessness, and emotional turbulence. And these practices gradually reshape thought patterns, emotional responses, and moral discernment, fostering resilience, clarity, and a profound sense of purpose, because spiritual growth is cumulative and requires consistent effort over time. And as I engaged more deeply with these practices, I began to experience subtle yet powerful shifts, increased patience, empathy, and humility, heightened clarity and focus, and a deepening awareness of the interconnectedness of my actions, intentions, and spiritual well-being. And it became evident that faith is not an external label or a static achievement, but a dynamic, evolving process that transforms how one experiences, interprets, and interacts with the world. And I realized that conversion is less about a singular moment of declaration and more about a continuous unfolding of understanding, reflection, and engagement that gradually shapes the character, emotional landscape, and perspective of the individual, because authentic transformation is nurtured by persistent effort, self-awareness, and the courage to confront internal doubts, habits, and fears, and to replace them with practices and intentions that cultivate alignment, trust, and connection with the divine. And through this understanding, I recognize that the journey toward faith is both deeply humbling and profoundly empowering, because it requires surrender to guidance and principles higher than oneself, while simultaneously equipping the heart and mind with tools for resilience, clarity, and discernment. And as I navigated this journey, I came to appreciate the critical role of consistency in spiritual practice, because each deliberate act, no matter how small, reinforces alignment between intention and action, gradually transforming the heart and mind, fostering stability, insight, and a lasting connection with God. And I noticed that the presence of role models like my friend remains invaluable, as observing their sincerity, humility, and consistent practice not only inspires, but also provides a practical demonstration of how spiritual principles can be integrated into daily life, highlighting that true transformation arises from the intersection of observation, reflection, and personal effort. And I understood that this interplay is essential for nurturing both the motivation and the practical means to embody faith authentically. And as I internalized these insights, I began to recognize that faith permeates not only the spiritual dimension of life, but also emotional, psychological, and social aspects, because alignment with divine principles cultivates resilience, ethical clarity, emotional stability, and compassionate engagement with others. This holistic transformation gradually reshapes the individual, creating coherence between internal beliefs and external actions, fostering meaning, purpose, and enduring peace. And through this lens, I came to see that conversion is not an endpoint, but a process, one that requires patience, openness, and persistent engagement, because the heart's growth is ongoing and spiritual awakening unfolds progressively as awareness, intention, and practice deepen over time. And reflecting on this journey, I realized that even the simplest acts of sincere observation, such as noticing a friend's devotion, can catalyze profound internal change, sparking curiosity, reflection, and deliberate action that evolves into a sustained, life-altering transformation. Because the power of spiritual inspiration lies not in grand gestures, but in consistent, authentic examples that awaken the heart, encourage engagement, and nurture alignment. And in recognizing this, I felt both gratitude and responsibility, understanding that every choice, every reflection, and every act of sincere devotion contributes to a dynamic, evolving process that cultivates lasting clarity, purpose, resilience, and connection with the divine, demonstrating that faith, when embraced intentionally and consistently, has the capacity to transform not only the inner landscape of the heart and mind, but the entirety of one's life experience, guiding it toward alignment, peace, and profound meaning. As I reached the later stages of my journey, I began to fully appreciate that embracing Islam and integrating its teachings into my life is not a singular event or a moment of instantaneous transformation, but a lifelong evolving process that requires constant reflection, deliberate practice, and sincere engagement, because true spiritual growth unfolds gradually, shaped by the interplay between observation, introspection, and active application. And I realized that while the initial inspiration came from witnessing my friend's prayer, the enduring transformation depended upon my willingness to commit, reflect, and internalize the principles of faith in a way that aligned my heart, mind, and actions with divine guidance. And I began to notice that this alignment brought profound changes in the way I approached daily life, because faith provides both structure and perspective, allowing the heart to navigate challenges, uncertainties, and emotional turbulence with clarity, patience, and resilience. And as I engaged more consistently with prayer, reflection, and study, I observed subtle yet significant shifts: a growing sense of peace and stability, heightened awareness of my intentions, deeper empathy and compassion toward others, and a strengthened capacity for patience, gratitude, and moral discernment. And it became evident that these transformations were not accidental, but the natural outcome of sustained effort, intentionality, and the deliberate cultivation of spiritual awareness, because the heart, when nurtured consistently, gradually aligns with principles that foster clarity, integrity, and connection with the divine. And I came to understand that spiritual awakening is as much relational as it is personal, because observing sincere devotion in others provides inspiration, guidance, and models for practice. But the depth, authenticity, and sustainability of transformation ultimately depend on personal engagement, reflection, and persistent effort. And this dual dynamic of external observation and internal cultivation creates a powerful framework for lasting change, showing that faith thrives when nurtured through both example and deliberate practice. And I realized that moments of doubt, hesitation, and struggle are integral to this process, serving not as failures, but as opportunities to deepen reflection, reinforce intention, and cultivate resilience. Because encountering and addressing internal resistance strengthens the heart, clarifies understanding, and reinforces commitment. And as I navigated these challenges, I began to notice how the principles of faith began to influence every aspect of my existence, shaping my decisions, emotional responses, relationships, overall perspective on life. And I recognized that the integration of faith is not about rigid perfection or immediate results, but about persistent effort, intentionality, and the willingness to allow the heart to be gradually reshaped. And I saw that each small, deliberate act, whether it is a prayer offered sincerely, a moment of reflection, an act of kindness, or an internal effort to align intention with action, contributes cumulatively to profound transformation, gradually creating coherence between belief, thought, and behavior. And this realization illuminated the profound truth that conversion and spiritual awakening are ongoing, dynamic processes, because the heart continuously evolves, deepens, and aligns through sustained engagement with faith, and that the work of cultivating the soul is never complete, but each conscious effort brings the individual closer to clarity, resilience, purpose, and a sustained connection with the divine. And as I reflected on the entirety of my journey, I felt a deep sense of gratitude, recognizing that the initial spark, inspired by witnessing my friend's devotion, had initiated a transformative cascade of reflection, learning, practice, and integration that reshaped my heart, mind, and life in ways that continue to unfold. And I understood that this process is both humbling and empowering because it requires surrender, patience, and humility, while simultaneously equipping the heart and mind with resilience, clarity, and moral discernment. And ultimately, I realized that faith is not an endpoint, but a journey, one that invites the heart to continuously grow, align, and connect with the divine, demonstrating that even the smallest, most subtle moments of inspiration, like observing someone pray, have the potential to catalyze lifelong transformation because they awaken reflection, ignite curiosity, and encourage deliberate engagement with practices that cultivate enduring peace, clarity, and purpose. And as I continue along this path, I remain aware that the journey of spiritual awakening is ongoing, requiring consistent reflection, conscious practice, and sincerity of intention, and that every step, no matter how incremental, contributes to a profound, holistic, and lasting transformation that touches the heart, mind, soul, and every aspect of life, guiding it toward alignment, meaning resilience, and a deep, enduring connection with the divine, showing that faith, once embraced with sincerity and persistence, has the power to transform life entirely, creating a coherent, purposeful, and spiritually grounded existence that nurtures both the inner self and one's interactions with the world. And that this transformation, while gradual, cumulative, and sometimes challenging, ultimately yields a profound sense of fulfillment, peace, and connection that far surpasses any temporal satisfaction or external validation, because it roots the individual in a purpose that is enduring, holistic, and divinely guided, shaping every thought, feeling, action, and relationship in alignment with a higher, sacred vision for life.